At 10:30, the school called me because Julie was not there.
The driver says she got off at this bus shelter, less than 50 meters from her back door.
Anytime police suspect that its an abduction has occurred, they just pull out all the stops possible.
When the bus pulled up Tuesday night, there was a man inside the bus shelter when Julie got off.
But the blood we found in the trunk, it appeared to be human blood, but we couldn't prove it was Julie's.
At 8 o'clock this morning, police divers were in the Montreal River in Terrebonne. Investigators say they have new information on where to look for Julie Surprenant's remains.
Maybe this time is going to be the right one.
You have to be vigilant because, yeah, it could have been me. It could have been anybody close to me.
Just tell us where she is. I don't care who you are, but just tell us where she is.
Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, a disappearance that has stumped police for more than 2 decades. In the fall of 1999, a popular teenage girl seemed to vanish without a trace. Now, this is a story with many dead ends and surprising twists, told by one of the reporters who has covered it since day one. Here now is Mike Armstrong with Just Steps from Home, the disappearance of Julie Surprenant.
It was a routine day in every way except how it ended. Julie Surprenant, a popular outgoing teenager, was headed home by bus on the night of November 16, 1999. It was a Tuesday. Julie had spent the day at school and the evening at a local youth center. She and friends had been planning a Christmas gift wrapping stand at the local mall to raise money for their improv club. Arriving at the bus stop near her home, literally just steps from safety, Julie instead stepped off the bus into a mystery. Julie disappeared. For her father, Michel Surprenant, it has been 25 years hoping.
You cannot turn the page because in my mind, Julie is somewhere waiting for us, you know. If you turn the page, that means you
Forget about her.
You forget it, you know. So, for me, you never close the page.
Julie lived with her father on the island of Île Saint-Jean. It's a tucked-away sliver of land, barely a square kilometer, and aside from a small convenience store, entirely residential. The island sits in the Mille-Île River, its currents flowing west to east, carrying water from the Ottawa River out to the St. Lawrence and onto the Atlantic. The traffic flows perpendicular to the water. Highway 25 bisects the island. Île Saint-Jean is part of the town of Terrebonne. The bridge to the north connects it to the rest of the municipality. The bridge to the south connects it to the city of Laval and further on to Montreal. Well, right in the middle of the island, at the bus stop where Julie disappeared, is a monument in her memory. It's the closest thing the Surprenant family has to a grave.
The hat is because Julie had a hat similar to that, no? And it's symbolic. It's symbolic to Julie. You have the date that she disappeared. 16th of November on 99. Yeah.
The week his daughter disappeared, Surprenant describes as a storm. He felt overwhelmed, pushed and pulled in every direction. As a young reporter, I was on the ground in those early days, covering what was a massive search.
Tiny Saint-Jean Island looks like a police state today. Police cruisers are on the roads, officers are going door to door, a helicopter is searching the rivers. 20 police searchers and 20 investigators are working on the case, but no one wants to find Julie Surprenant more than this man, her father.
She told me what she was going to do all around the day, and everything what she said, happened what like she said, except the end.
Julie had just recently moved in with her father on the main floor of this building, but sometimes she would still stay with her mother just off island. It wasn't like Julie not to call, but Michel Surprenant assumed that's what happened when she didn't come home. It was only the next morning that he realized something was wrong.
At 10:30, the school called me because Julie was not there. At that time, it's like an alarm is ringing, you know. I called the police. Next morning, an army of policies were there, copters, dogs. Wow.
What police knew immediately was that Julie's disappearance was suspicious. And speaking to family and friends, they were certain she hadn't run away.
Today, the only thing I can say is, if you can think about Julie, think strong about Julie.
This is the man who led the investigation, retired provincial police officer Roberto Bergeron. He spent 20 years with the Sûreté du Québec's Major Crimes Unit and worked on some of the biggest and most horrific crimes in the province. Well, Julie's is one that left a mark. At home, Bergeron has a table with pictures of his grandchildren, and with them, one of Julie.
Quant à Julie,
Julie, you can't fault her for anything. She was 15 years old and had just left a youth center.
À Julie, on ne peut pas rien lui reprocher. C'est une jeune de 15 ans qui sortait du centre jeunesse, qui était toujours prête à aider tout le monde.
She was always helping others, and that night she was heading home. There was nothing in anything we checked. In her room, in her books, in her agenda, in her locker, in all the people we talked to, we didn't find anything. She was a good kid.
She just vanished without a trace.
Pina Arcamoni was at the time with the Missing Children's Network and remembers Julie's disappearance as one that panicked parents. In April of the same year, there had been another apparent kidnapping. A 10-year-old girl in Montreal, Jolene Riendeau.
To have two abductions within a few months in one city, in one province, was already a big thing. It's not like she was coming home alone at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was still between 8, 9 o'clock. There's still a lot of traffic, a lot of circulation. It was a school day, you know, in the middle of the week, and a parent's worst nightmare just happened.
What made Julie's disappearance harder to understand was where it happened. She was so close to home. The bus driver remembered dropping Julie off after talking to her about the fare.
The price that she had to pay is different than if she stayed in Terrebonne or going to Montreal. Then a discussion was made with the bus driver and Julie. Then he remembered that.
The driver says she got off at this bus shelter, less than 50 meters from her back door. Usually, she would walk from the shelter, cross the road to the fence behind her house. She would climb over and go in through the back door. Tuesday, she didn't make it.
The bus driver also remembers one other person, a person police would very much like to speak to. When the bus pulled up Tuesday night, there was a man inside the bus shelter when Julie got off. The bus driver asked him if he wanted to get on, but he made a hand gesture to say no. The bus driver pulled away and left Julie with the man.
There was that guy in the shelter with dark clothes, a man in the 20s, a white man in the 20s.
Julie est disparue de façon mystérieuse.
Police put out a drawing of a person of interest. A few days later, they added another.
2 men were nearby the bus shelter.
Witnesses say these 2 men were around the bus shelter for at least an hour the night of the disappearance. When Julie got off the bus, the man with the red hat and scarf was inside the bus shelter. A man wearing a black coat and white hat was walking around behind the shelter.
A few minutes later, another witness puts 2 men at this street corner, about 150 meters away from the bus shelter. The witness says they were standing beside a car with the young woman, and their description matches that of the young men at the bus shelter.
We don't know if she was the one in the car. We think so, but it's a possibility.
In an abduction case, every minute matters. As it would turn out, some of the early leads would be dead ends, and the main suspect would be closer than anyone imagined.
Welcome back to Crime Beat. 16-year-old Julie Surprenant has disappeared without a trace just meters from her home. Right away, police know it's an abduction and that the clock is ticking. We now return to Mike Armstrong with just steps from home, the disappearance of Julie Surprenant.
It is a week people on Ile Saint-Jean haven't forgotten. Julie Surprenant was last seen at the bus stop in the neighborhood near her home, and that's where police begin the search. Investigators fan out, knocking on literally every door.
It was huge. Anytime police suspect that an abduction has occurred, they just pull out all the stops possible. The search dogs, the air, land searches are conducted.
Now, police have leads in the case. The hunt is on for the strange figure seen at the bus stop, and there's another suspect, a man who was in the area on the night of the disappearance with a long criminal record and a weak alibi.
At
the beginning, there was another individual who was out on parole. He was on the other side of the street with his girlfriend on that night. He should have been at his halfway house, but he'd broken curfew. We worked a lot on that individual.
That suspect was eventually ruled out. He agreed to take a polygraph test and passed. That same option was given to another local man, again with a long criminal history. Richard Bouillon was a 45-year-old car salesman who lived in the same building as Julie and her father. In fact, in the apartment directly above. Parts of his story didn't add up.
When we were able to get him to come, at the moment when he was supposed to take the polygraph test, he showed up completely out of it, completely drugged out, under the influence of cocaine. Giving him a test in that condition wouldn't have given us anything.
What police did have was enough for a warrant. They searched Bouillon's apartment and vehicle. Traces of blood were found. The suspect claimed it was from fishing. It was not.
Il avait du sang sur des chaussures dans le coffre ou à l'intérieur de sa voiture.
He had blood on boots in the trunk of his car. DNA at the time wasn't as efficient as it is today. So the blood we found in the trunk, it appeared to be human blood, but we couldn't prove it was Julie's.
Richard Bouillon, according to court documents, had been in and out of trouble most of his life. There were 2 sexual assaults with a weapon as a teenager. At 19, he pleaded guilty to the attempted rape of a 6-year-old child. That was followed in his 20s by multiple cases of indecent exposure and 2 more sexual assaults. There were also convictions for robbery, mischief, assault, and drug possession. At the time of Julie's disappearance, Bouillon was on probation after serving 7 months for juvenile prostitution.
When you moved into this building, you asked the landlord,
Yeah.
was it safe?
Yeah.
What did he say?
He said nothing particularly, but what I know at that time is that guy had the problem with domestic violence, but I never heard that guy about sex offender.
Surprenant says he had suspicions about his neighbor and told police. Bouillon had often tried intimidating people in the neighborhood, claiming to be a Hell's Angel. But something seemed to change after Julie's disappearance. Surprenant remembers one strange run-in in particular.
I was arriving on the street with my car, and I saw Richard Bouillon. It was at the mailbox, and when he saw me, he ran away, and he left the key on the mailbox.
Because he was super nervous, apparently.
I think.
Richard Bouillon était
Richard Bouillon was a compulsive liar. He gives versions of stories that don't make sense. He tries to convince what he's saying is true, even when it makes no sense.
Without anything concrete, police weren't able to charge Bouillon. He was a free man, still living above Michel Surprenant.
I never spoke to him. I don't want to speak to him because he was lying all the time. So why talk with something who's lying?
An 18-year-old woman got off the bus at the corner of Laurentian Boulevard and Bienville.
In the months after Julie's disappearance, with every new crime came the question, could it be related to Julie?
The guy grabbed her.
This was an attempted abduction.
I heard that this morning, and I was trying to know if it's a link with Julie.
Now, a year after Julie's disappearance, a major shakeup in the case. The French-language station TQS reported that Bouillon was the #1 suspect. This is one of its journalists surprising him outside his home. Once his name was public, other victims of Bouillon's who'd never gone to police started coming forward.
Exactly. They hoped it would help police in the Julie Surprenant case as well.
In March of 2001, Bouillon was driving over this bridge on Montreal's West Island. A car slowed down in front of him, he stopped, and was suddenly surrounded by police and arrested. Documentary filmmaker Stéphane Parent researched Julie's disappearance. He obtained both police notes and video of Bouillon's interrogation by Officer Bergeron. In it, Bouillon calls the whole thing a nightmare and a conspiracy against him. Waving his hand, he says, "Julie wasn't me."
For us, when he was incarcerated for the sexual assaults, it was a priority for us because he would say, well, he's going to be detained. At least we can keep working without him making more victims.
Now, there were multiple victims from Bouillon's past. He was found guilty of 7 charges, including more sexual assaults. It was serious enough the judge handed down the most severe sentence possible in Canada, declaring Bouillon a dangerous offender. That designation meant he could spend the rest of his life behind bars, but there was still nothing new on Julie's disappearance. That would come 5 years later in a call from this man, one of Quebec's top crime reporters.
One day, Claude Poirier called me and he said, "Do you know, Richard Bouillon is dying now?" I said, "No."
The #1 suspect in the death of his daughter was no longer behind bars, but was instead in a hospital bed. Richard Bouillon had been moved to a facility just a few kilometers from where Julie disappeared so he could be treated close to his elderly mother. Julie's father would ask to speak to him. It is a place where at times medicine meets maximum security. Cité de la Santé Hospital in Laval, Quebec has several special rooms. They have secured windows and beds bolted to the floor. The facility is used to treat inmates from various prisons around the province. They are watched by correctional officers around the clock. Well, Richard Bouillon was, in 2006, serving an indeterminate sentence. He'd been deemed a dangerous offender and could be held as long as the court felt he was still a threat to the public. But there was instead a threat to his life. Bouillon had been diagnosed with cancer and moved to room 466 at Cité de la Santé, a room that was part hospital, part holding cell. Well, the cancer was serious. In fact, terminal.
Hospital is one thing, dying is another thing. He was dying.
Michel Surprenant says when he heard Bouillon was sick, he hoped it would make him want to speak out. Perhaps on his deathbed, Bouillon would want to open up about the disappearance of Julie 6 years earlier. Had he been involved, and if so, what happened? As it turned out, there were others who wanted answers to those questions as well. Some of Bouillon's fellow inmates in the prison where he had been held tried to get answers through force, while behind bars, he had been beaten.
I've heard he had some difficult times inside the walls, but I don't know more. If they had gotten an admission, I can tell you, we'd have known about it. We might not have known how it came about. We could have criticized how the confession was obtained, but I know he was roughed up inside.
With Bouillon near death, police hoped for a final confession. Investigators visited the hospital and room 466 with a strategy. They wanted to give Bouillon the chance to clear his conscience.
Basically, the bottom line was, we know you're very sick. Maybe with your life expectancy, you could help police. Because it won't change anything for you if we can find Julie's body. But he never wanted to cooperate with police.
There were other attempts to speak to Bouillon. Legendary Quebec crime reporter Claude Poirier says he asked for access and was turned down. And Michel Surprenant says he himself went to police suggesting he go in alone and record his conversation.
You also asked to go and visit.
Yeah, they never want. Give me a mic me and let me talk with that guy. No, they never want.
Surprenant believes his request was turned down because police didn't think he had the discipline to do it. Well, there wasn't much time to argue. Bouillon would only spend 6 days in the hospital.
I imagine when you heard he died, there must have been a lot of frustration that you didn't get to talk to him, or that nobody talked to him.
That's mean if you had hope about that guy, it's out.
It's gone.
Yeah. It's gone.
Any secrets Bouillon might have had, it appeared he had taken with him to the grave. He died June 21st, 2006. One of the only times he spoke publicly about Julie's disappearance was in this courthouse in Saint-Jérôme, Quebec. It was January of 2001, in the trial that would have him declared a dangerous offender. Bouillon testified in his own defense. He talked about this report on TV the year before, where he was named the prime suspect. Bouillon said it ruined his life. Even his mother was different with him, he said, after the police suspicions were made public. He also talked about this interrogation, saying it was unlike any of his other arrests. Police had charged him with crimes from his past, but he said that wasn't what they were after. Quote, I was interrogated for 6 hours about the Julie Surprenant case, even though it wasn't part of the arrest. I even told them, listen, did you arrest me for this or for Julie Surprenant? On the stand, Bouillon insisted he'd lived in his apartment for 7 years without trouble, surrounded by children. He claimed it was only because of his prior convictions and psychiatric evaluations that police were trying to pin his neighbor's disappearance on him. Bouillon also blamed police for his name getting out as the #1 suspect. On the stand, he said a lawsuit was coming. Quote, for sure, I can do something about what they've done to me. I don't want to talk about it here, but for sure. The amount I don't know. I'm going to be rich. They're going to pay for what they did to me. They completely destroyed my life. Bouillon told different stories about the night Julie disappeared. Early on, he claimed to be out of the country. It turned out he had been at home. His mother testified they'd had dinner in Montreal that evening, and then he'd bought drugs, gone back to his apartment, and taken them. Jeanne Bouillon told the court she'd warned her son that if he was responsible for Julie's disappearance, she'd never speak to him again. His denial to her didn't close the door completely. Quote, when he talked to me about it, he laughed, and he said, Mom, they'll never find proof, Mom. Don't worry yourself, sleep easy. I swear on your head. With Bouillon dead, police lost their main suspect. Years passed with no developments. I had covered the disappearance in 1999. In 2009, I covered the 10th anniversary.
The expression may be time heals all wounds. Well, a decade hasn't done it for Michel Surprenant. He says he still thinks about his missing daughter every day, and it still hurts.
I think with time, it's harder, you know. about the fact that Julie's not there. I think it's harder with the time.
Julie had been at a local youth center. She took the bus that night and was supposed to be home by 9. Her disappearance was news for weeks. Her face was everywhere. There was a huge campaign to keep the public on the lookout, even a massive candlelight vigil. Julie's disappearance really stuck with people who lived through it, even people who covered it. I was here over and over 10 years ago when it happened. What made it so hard to believe was where she disappeared. The bus driver remembered dropping her off at this bus shelter, but somehow she never made it home. Home was just 50 meters away. With the anniversary, new posters with a familiar face will be going up again to maybe jog someone's memory. Just as the family's pain hasn't ended, its search hasn't either. Michel Surprenant once told me he'd keep the back light on until his daughter came home. He ended up moving away just a year later. He says it was too hard passing the bus shelter every day.
At that point, it was believed the case wasn't closed, but it was likely over. Richard Bouillon had died, and with him, any hope of an admission. Michel Surprenant to this day wishes he'd had the chance to speak to Bouillon as Julie's father.
You look the guy eyes to eyes, you know, and you ask the question firmly, and you wait, always looking in your eyes.
You didn't get that chance?
No. If you come back, you can see a lot of mistakes everywhere.
Well, one place mistakes were made was at the hospital. As it turned out, on his deathbed, something had changed with Bouillon, his conscience. In his last days, Bouillon had in fact told staff at the hospital he had killed Julie. The staff just didn't tell anyone. It felt like a crime that would never have closure. After Julie Surprenant vanished in November of 1999, days passed, then weeks, months, and years.
Today, on those days, it's painful, you know.
On the 10th anniversary, Julie's father made a public plea to anyone who might know anything.
Just tell us where she is. I don't care who you are, but just tell us where she is.
That plea would go unanswered. No one came forward. The main suspect, Richard Bouillon, had died 4 years earlier, taking with him to the grave any secrets he may have had. What no one knew, not then, was that he had confessed. Bouillon, on his deathbed, admitted to killing Julie. The problem was, no one would know he'd said anything for years.
Alors, bonjour, bienvenue à la dernière de la...
Crime reporter Claude Poirier was the host of a daily show on LCN, a French-language news channel in Quebec. In January of 2011, a caller to his show dropped a bombshell. As soon as the show ended, Poirier picked up the phone himself and called lawyer and former provincial justice minister Marc Bellemare.
And I remember he called me telling me that he had a phone call, and he said a lady called me, she was a nurse, and she was in the Cité de la Santé, and she heard Bouillon confessing in his bed while he was dying that he killed Julie Surprenant.
The nurse said Bouillon dumped the body in a sports bag in the Mille-Île River across from this church. It's a short walk from where he lived at the time and where Julie disappeared. Armed with that information, despite the long odds, later that year when the water was low, search teams returned to the river.
They came equipped with metal detectors and renewed hope. At 8 o'clock this morning, police divers were in the Mille-Île River in Terrebonne, searching several portions of the cold, murky water. Investigators say they have new information on where to look for Julie Surprenant's remains. They believe they are here, somewhere.
They are telling us that if ever there was something thrown in the water or that's been there for 12 years, it could still be there.
I'm just happy it's happened. I'm just happy for Julie.
and I hope they're going to find something.
Michel Surprenant watched the police work all day. He looked nervous, anxious, scared.
As a parent, I wouldn't want to live what he's living. At all.
Area residents who knew the family shared in his pain.
Maybe this time is going to be the right one.
You have to be vigilant because, yeah, it could have been me. It could have been anybody close to me.
Search teams would spend 2 days on the water, going over a stretch of about 600 meters. Michel Surprenant watched from start to finish. After more than a decade of spring thaws and ice flows, divers weren't confident and found nothing. But now there were questions and criticisms. Why had the nurse not spoken up earlier when Bouillon might have been able to give information? A Quebec coroner wanted answers and called an unexpected and unique public inquiry.
It's the only public investigation that was held by the coroner in Quebec in a case where we don't have the absolute certainty that she was killed.
The coroner would hear testimony over 2 days at the Laval courthouse. What she would hear would shock the province. Nurse E26 testified that while treating Bouillon at Cité de la Santé Hospital, her patient seemed ready to unburden himself. Bouillon told her that in his past he had raped several boys and girls and that he'd abducted, raped, and murdered Julie. Bouillon said he'd gotten rid of the body in a hockey bag, weighted down with bricks. But there was more. Not only had Bouillon confessed to the nurse more than once, but he'd also confessed to an orderly, again, multiple times. The two women testified that they discussed what they'd heard with colleagues and the head nurse, but believed they had to protect their patient's confidentiality. The nurse, Prudhomme, said she had not come forward with Bouillon's confession because she thought the guards who were in the room at the time would have passed on the information to police, so they assumed police knew. They also said they feared Richard Bouillon.
They told to the coroner that they were afraid of him. They knew that he has a lengthy and a very heavy criminal history. When you speak with somebody who tells you that he killed a young lady, I assume that it must be hard to hear and to realize, and after this confession, you have to go back to take care of this criminal.
But you can understand why they were nervous then?
Yeah, I can understand, but there's no reason to keep this secret.
Now, the coroner was also given access to the logs of the prison guards watching Bouillon. There was no mention of the inmate saying anything. That, even though both the nurse and the orderly swore a guard was always present for every conversation.
The guardian is body to body with the nurse. Why? Because if the guy is doing something wrong, the guardian can intervene right now, right?
So the guards are right there the whole time?
They are body with the nurse. So
any conversation the nurse had, then a guard heard it?
That's for sure. 200% for sure.
When I was questioning the nurse, I asked her, are you sure that these two persons working for the penitentiary of Drummondville heard what Bouillon said? And she said, yes, everybody heard that. So for the nurse, I can understand partly, but it was a mistake, sure, but for the two correctional people working for the prison, it's absolutely unbelievable.
While Bouillon was in hospital, he shared his room for a time with another prisoner. 4 days after Bouillon's death, police questioned that inmate.
Ça, c'était à la Cité de la Santé.
Documentary filmmaker Stéphane Parent has obtained video of that meeting. Investigators would conclude parts of the prisoner's story weren't credible, but he also reported Bouillon confessed to him. With all that information and testimony, Coroner Catherine Brudel-Tessier would hand down a report with recommendations, improvements that should be made to the system so a confession from a patient wouldn't be missed again, There would also be a conclusion in the coroner's final report on what had happened to Julie Surprenant.
Welcome back. In his final days, the prime suspect in Julie Surprenant's disappearance wanted to come clean. Richard Bouillon confessed to killing the 16-year-old, but the hospital staff who heard his admission stayed silent. That decision would later trigger a coroner's inquest into what went wrong. Here now is Mike Armstrong with the conclusion of just steps from home, the disappearance of Julie Surprenant.
Just one day before she vanished, meters from her home, Julie Surprenant cooked a meat pie, a pâté in French. It was supposed to be supper one day that week. For years, her father hoped to one day share it with her.
I keep that pâté in my freezer.
For how long?
10 years. I said one day we're gonna eat it, you know, one day.
It became harder to hold on to hope in 2012 after revelations from a coroner's inquest into Julie's disappearance. A nurse and an orderly testified one of their patients had confessed to kidnapping and killing Julie. That patient, Richard Bouillon, had lived in the apartment directly above Julie and her father.
As I'm listening to the testimonial, I'm watching Michel Surprenant's face, and for the first time since I had known him, I just saw a defeated father listening to this information that no one acted on.
Coroner Catherine Rudel-Tessier handed down her final report September 21st, 2012, and with it, the closest thing Julie's family has had to closure. The coroner concluded Bouillon likely killed Julie. She writes, quote, "This was not a case of a runaway. It is probable that the young girl was abducted after getting off the bus on Ile Saint-Jean and was subsequently murdered." The testimonies heard suggest that Mr. Richard Bouillon was involved in this homicide. He took his final secrets with him, even though it appears he wanted to reveal everything before dying. Now, the report doesn't lay blame, but it does say the healthcare workers were under no obligation to protect their patients' confidentiality. They weren't bound by any professional secrecy because Bouillon wanted to speak, and because it involved a crime, the law would have allowed them to go public. Well, Marc Bellemont's criticism isn't only for the hospital staff. He believes the prison guards watching Bouillon heard his repeated confessions and chose not to get involved, likely out of laziness.
Nobody was reprimanded after this mistake. That is huge for them because they work for the penitentiary. They are a part of the justice system. Incredible. And I'm not sure that if this same event would happen today, I'm not sure it would be different.
15 years after Julie's disappearance, it was her sister who pulled away the cover, revealing the monument in Julie's memory. It was one of her only public appearances. There are different ways to grieve. Julie's mother has never spoken out, while her father has never stopped.
15 years after, to be witness about the testimony of everybody about this case is very emotional, okay? And I'm very touched, about the sympathy of everybody.
Michel Surprenant turned his grief almost into fuel and has used it to help others. For 2 decades, in dozens of major crimes, Surprenant has been there to help families who've lost loved ones. He co-founded an advocacy group and has provided personal support to people usually in the middle of a nightmare, like the family of a 10-year-old boy who disappeared in Montreal in 2018.
Well, the father of Ariel Kouakou says he hasn't stopped hoping his son will be found alive. Kouakou met with the media today at a church not far from his home in Ahuntsic-Cartierville. He was joined by Michel Surprenant, the father of Julie Surprenant, who went missing in 1999. Kouakou says he has relied on Surprenant frequently for support in the last 30 days, calling him at all hours of the day. He says it's hard to believe Surprenant has dealt with this for 19 years, and it's only been 1 month for him.
Only a parent that has lived this nightmare can truly understand what another family. And so we buddy them up, and there's a lot of respect, and they listen to one another. Like someone like Michel can also provide a lot of good advice to another family as well.
He's a huge supporter of all these families still today, and people ask him, what can we do when it happens?
If they feel that the police is not really understanding what they're going through or it's taking too long, so they'll say, in my experience, this is what I did, try this, speak to this person, this is what maybe you can say. So it's just little tips that help them just move forward day by day.
How available was Michel Surprenant?
Oh, very. When there were opportunities for the media opportunities as well, he sees them all, radio, TV, print. He was always there.
Julie est disparue de façon mystérieuse.
For police officers who worked on Julie's case, there is lingering disappointment that her remains have never been found. But it did lead to changes in how disappearances are treated today. It's all hands on deck immediately. In Julie's case, she was abducted on the Tuesday, reported missing on the Wednesday, and provincial police only joined the search on the Thursday. That may have given Bouillon the time to take the remains of his victim to the water.
If we had been notified in the hours following her disappearance instead of a few days later, maybe the outcome of the case would have been different. There was plenty of time. He had 2 whole nights to do what he needed to do, then get rid of her, as he himself said, in a sports bag, to get rid of it and everything.
There is one hope still left. Not one that would help recover Julie's remains, but one that might at least confirm once and for all Bouillon's involvement. When technicians tested the traces of blood found on Bouillon's boots, they weren't able to link it to Julie. But there have been major cold cases solved in recent years in Quebec by retesting evidence with modern technology.
Back in 1990, it took a piece of blood, I'd say the size of a quarter. But now it can be so small that you can't see it, and they can detect it.
If there's some Julie's blood in the Bouillon's apartment, it can give him another reason to think that he's the killer.
Would you, as his lawyer, is that a request that could be made, or how does that work?
Yes. It's an idea. I can talk about that with Michel.
Both police and Quebec's provincial forensic lab refused to confirm whether the evidence has been retested. While there are other questions left unanswered as well. No one asked Bouillon if he was alone when he abducted and killed Julie. Could the strange figure at the bus stop have been an accomplice? The deathbed confession was something, but it didn't answer what Michel Surprenant wants to know most of all.
It didn't give us where she is, right? So he was on his deathbed. He can say anything. What's the value if you don't know the clue we need where she is?
Surprenant believes his daughter is likely dead, but that she's still waiting to be found. He still fights a battle to fall asleep every night, thinking of her.
The nurse and the orderly at the center of this story haven't spoken publicly about what they heard since that coroner's hearing. When we reached out to Quebec Provincial Police, we were told they can't speak about Julie Surprenant's disappearance or what evidence they've kept because the case is still considered active. The retired officer we spoke to said he believes the cold case squad would have at this point retested evidence. But if that's happened, no one has reached out to Julie's father to tell him. Michel Surprenant and his lawyer are considering a formal request. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.